Well, good morning, everyone, and welcome to our webinar. I think we'll fill out the first customary couple of minutes with some technical details from Elina and some questions for the audience to answer, so giving more people a chance to dial in at the same time. Good, Elina.
Okay. Yes. Okay. Good morning, everyone. And while everyone is joining to us, I just give some short housekeeping rules. But I believe still, I still believe that maybe, yeah, if you're not talking, maybe you can mute yourself. Somebody muted me. Okay. Okay. So otherwise, I believe that everyone already knows how everything works on Microsoft Teams, which button means what. So I don't go there, but just small reminder that this webinar is being recorded. So please take that into account. And also all the presentations that you will see today, as well as the record from this webinar, it will be also published at the VASAB website later on. And yeah, in order to keep the data flow on the safe side, during the presentations, we kindly ask you to switch off the cameras, but during the discussions and other time also, you're welcome to come back and switch on the cameras. The questions, if you have any questions, please use the chat function, or also you can raise your virtual hand and then moderator will address you. So that was quickly from my side, but as Kai already promised, that also we want to find out who are you and where are you from, and yeah, what we are dealing today with. So I will launch the poll. I hope that you can see it. Is it coming? Or So yes, first question. Yeah. So please feel free to type in your place or country, or you know. So at the moment we have Latvians the most part, but maybe there are also other countries. Only 6 responses, but I believe there are more people.
Keep in mind that this is the first time we're using this tool, and there may be some lag there here. So
now we have more diverse picture, and so we have people coming outside the Baltic Sea region, even the Netherlands, UK. Yeah, EU in general. Yes, that's so.
Right, so I do see it's a very German-heavy audience, right? So
now it has turned like that. Okay, I think that was the first attempt. Now I will try to launch another question to you, asking you which institutional background you are coming from. Now it should be visible. And now you can just click your favorite option. While the results are coming in, we see that the majority are coming from public sector, which means that yeah, probably the topic it is related to the institutions. But also we see the quite insignificant part coming from business area. Okay, and then I will try to another question. About the sector that you are working with, what is your favorite or what you're doing in your daily life? Yeah, I see the planners, the wind energy experts. Yes. So somebody from shipping. There's also other. Yeah, we don't know what other means at the moment, but yeah, there are also nature conservation and somebody also from fishery. That's great. Okay, I see that answers are not coming anymore, so I think we can stop our poll here.
Thank you. And I think at least for the ones who have the Microsoft Teams desktop app, you can go to the tab that says polls and change your answers or amend them if you can think of which sector you're actually from. So the next point of the agenda would be the official opening of the webinar by Mr. Meltzian. Mr. Meltzian is working at the German Federal Ministry of Housing, Urban Development and Construction. He is head of the division there and running he's basically running the German VASAB Chairmanship, I think, if we can say this, at the moment. So he has very gracefully agreed to dial in from his vacation in southern France and take a minute of his vacation time to say some welcoming words. And so thank you, Mr. Meltzian. We won't keep you waiting any longer.
Thank you, Mr. Trümpler, and dear participants. As acting VASAB Chair, I welcome you to today's VASAB webinar on offshore wind energy challenges and opportunities emerging from new European expansion targets. That is organized by the Federal Maritime and Hydrographic Agency and with the support of the VASAB Secretariat. The many registrations and the diverse audience, as we learned just recently, and the great interest shows that we hit a nerve and the up-to-dateness of the topic. The first strategy of the federal government in Germany for offshore wind energy dates back 20 years, and the aim then was 20 to 25 gigawatts by 2030. So quite foresighted, and it does not differ too much from the aims that we have now. So we see offshore wind energy has evolved and developed already for many years, and a lot of practical experience has been made. Around 1,500 turbines are currently in the German exclusive economic zone working. But the need for more offshore wind energy has never been more pressing. The effects of climate change are more and more evident, and the EU has launched an ambitious European Green Deal to become the first carbon neutral continent by 2050. And the objectives are more likely to be tightened over the coming years. So national governments reacted and advanced with new ambitious targets for renewable energy. And this year, due to the war in the Ukraine, energy independence from Russian fossil fuels as fast as possible emerged and adds to the pressure on the available space and competing demands like nature conservation, fisheries, shipping, but also military purposes. So maritime spatial planning will therefore play a key role in balancing these different interests. And while there have been a lot of experiences made, I think they are unevenly spread. Some member states already have matured maritime spatial plans and operating wind farms, while other countries now enter from planning into the operational phase. And although there's a lot of cross-border and sea basin-wide exchange in different foreign institutions, like in VASAB, there still is potential for further exchange, alignment, and harmonization of standards, processes, and terminology. So this webinar is one small building block to foster this exchange and bring different experts, states, and practitioners together. I'm very happy that Kai Trümpler will moderate today's webinar with planning and permitting practice in the North Sea and also in the Baltic Sea. So we will start with a summary of recent development. Then VASAB, as the policy coordinator for spatial planning in the USBSR, will present the macro-regional policy context before we deepen specific topics on shipping, ecological impacts, and the Swedish approach from planning to projects. And at the end, we will have an open discussion with you as the audience on key topics, and you prove to be active already. So I wish you all a fruitful and interesting webinar, of which I'm quite sure. And by the end of the year, we will have a complementary VASAB webinar on land-based spatial planning. So keep an eye out for this as well. Thank you. Have a good day.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Meltzian, and thank you for the succinct introduction. Great as always. I mean, if you want to attend, you can, but otherwise you can go back to your vacation. Without losing some more time, I think we're going to go to the first speaker of the webinar, which will be Ms. Nele Meyer. Ms. Meyer has been working at the Federal Maritime and Hydrographic Agency in Germany, in Hamburg, since May 2016. She is mainly working on GIS in connection with the German Maritime Spatial Plan, focuses on offshore wind energy shipping and related planning questions. She has a lot of experience coordinating EU projects, and her educational background is quite impressive. She has a diploma in geography from the University of Bonn and a PhD in geoscience from the University of Oslo. So, with this introduction, Nele, please take over.
Thank you, Kai, and good morning from my side. I'm sharing my screen now. I hope everyone sees it now.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. So I will give a talk today on the summary of recent developments in offshore wind energy in the EU and more specifically in the BSR member states. To give you a short overview about the content of my presentation, first I'd like to say something about the reasons for renewable energy. So renewable energy as a whole in general, the EU ambitions to support renewable energy, like how national energy and climate plans come into play here. And then more specifically, I will focus offshore wind and the contribution of offshore wind for renewable energy generation. After that, we will hear something about the different countries around the Baltic Sea and how they are dealing with renewable energy and more specifically offshore wind. I will say also something about regional cooperation. Mr. Meltzian did this already a bit. And then in the end, I will give some conclusions. So why is the rollout of renewable energy of such urgent matter? The first of all reasons is climate change. So the IPCC 2021 again found that under all emission scenarios, the global surface temperature will rise. However, if intensive additional climate policy is applied, like in the two scenarios here, then warming can be limited to 1.5 to 2 degrees, which would be in line with the Paris Agreement. So we need additional climate policy. This is clear from that. Then a second reason is the finite nature and instability of fossil fuel supply. As an example, in 2021, we had a really strong rise of EU energy prices. So the import costs more than doubled. And a number of factors have contributed to this rise. So there was a global increase in gas prices, more than 170%. We had a really high energy demand due to a long and cold winter in early 2021, followed by a long and hot summer where cooling devices were needed. We had a greater consumption of gas in Asia due to economic recovery after COVID-19. And we had already in the end of 2021 increasing geopolitical tensions. This in combination with a high energy dependence really poses a problem and makes the wish for renewables even higher. So we see in this graph that in the Baltic Sea region, a lot of countries have energy import dependencies of more than 50%. So they import more than 50% of their energy. So how to achieve the desired switch to renewables? In 2021, on 14th July, the European Green Deal was presented by the European Commission. And the overriding goal of the European Green Deal is climate neutrality by 2050. And this goes along with a 55% cut in greenhouse gas emissions by 2030. And as you see from this graphic here, the European Green Deal really has a lot of different branches, a lot of initiatives, strategies, and directives are part of it. But one of the main parts is this Fit for 55 package, which is a package of legislative proposals to align the EU's climate and energy policy framework with the new targets. And maybe you've heard it yesterday, so parts of this package were rejected from the parliament. So I think it will be much more in the news in the coming days as well. In addition to the European Green Deal, more recently, a package was proposed from the European Commission called Repower EU, which is a joint European action for more affordable, secure, and sustainable energy. And this was proposed in March 2022, following the war of aggression in Ukraine. And it is a plan to make Europe independent from Russian fossil fuels. So the goal for this year is to reduce the EU demand for Russian gas by 2/3 before the end of this year. And this should be done by diversifying gas supplies, speed up the rollout of renewable gases, and replace gas in heating and power generation. As a consequence for the renewable energy sector is that there should be an even faster switch to electrification and renewable hydrogen. And this should be accomplished by revising expansion targets for renewable energies and speeding up permitting procedures. So also the Renewable Energy Directive from 2018 needs to be reviewed and revised, because this energy directive still focuses a target of cut in greenhouse gas emissions by at least 40% by 2030. And this goes along with a share of at least 32% of renewable energy by 2030. So quite recently, so on the 18th of May 2022, a proposal for an amendment of the Renewable Energy Directive was published. And here the new target is stated, so a cut in greenhouse gas emissions by at least 55% by 2030. And this now should go along with a share of at least 45% of renewable energy by 2030. For the national ambitions, the proposal also makes some rules or gives some ideas. So every country should designate sufficient renewable energy areas to achieve their national contributions to the EU target. And this should be done by identifying go-to areas for renewable energy, where no significant environmental impacts are to be expected. So they should not be located in Natura 2000 areas or nature conservation areas. And in these go-to areas, an SEA should be accomplished, but no further EIA is planned here. And the maximum procedure duration for all the technologies in these areas should be 1 year, and for repowering 6 months, plus 3 months if applicable. The expansion of renewable energy is declared to be an overriding public interest and to serve public health and safety. And this then makes it possible to have exemptions from nature conservation provisions. And this, of course, could also lead to have conflicts between the targets for nature conservation and the targets for renewable energy. So what are the effects of these changing targets on national energy and climate policy? In 2018, the National Energy and Climate Plans, called NECPs, have been introduced to EU regulation. And here it's stated that EU member states are required to report on their action to achieve the energy and climate goals defined at EU level. And these targets include a cut in greenhouse gas emissions, so a target here, a minimum share of renewable energy, a minimum improvement in energy efficiency, and more electricity interconnections. So the targets were defined for the first 10-year NECP period, 2021 to 2030. Most countries delivered their first NECP in 2019. However, the new targets on EU level make it necessary that the NECPs are already updated in 2023 to align the national targets to the EU targets. Maybe it's important to say that the national targets differ from the overall EU targets according to various factors. And so national targets can be higher or lower than the EU target. So why is offshore wind so important for renewable energy generation? Here we can see something in the EU strategy on offshore renewable energy from 2020. It presents several key technology, but offshore wind is the only one at a commercial stage. So key technologies are also floating photovoltaic, wave energy, tidal energy, floating wind. But only offshore wind, we have such experiences that it's at a commercial stage. The EU offshore wind market represents 42% of the global market in terms of cumulative installed capacity. That equals 12 gigawatt. And it is clear that the new targets require a massive scale-up of the offshore wind industry. So the EU strategy announces that the goal for 2050 is 300 gigawatt of offshore wind and 40 gigawatt of ocean energy installed capacity. And this graph shows that today we're at the 12 gigawatt for offshore wind. By 2030, it should be 60 gigawatt, and by 2050, it should be 300 gigawatt. And it is estimated that the investment needed is up to 800 billion euro. And the European maritime space needed to implement this 300 gigawatt target is estimated to be less than 3%. And this would be then in line with the EU biodiversity strategy and the space needed for these targets. So now I will give a short overview about the status quo in the different countries. But first of all, I'd like to thank several people who were so kind to give answers to our country-specific questions. And we will start with Estonia. So up here, you always see the current target for renewable energy share in the NECP. However, as I said before, this should be updated by 23, and we ask, like, is it currently revised? Is it updated already? And then we also ask a bit more specifically on offshore energy. So for Estonia, the government took a goal to be climate neutral in 2050, and roadmaps are made how to phase out from oil shale production, and other ambitions may rise during the Fit for 55 discussion, was stated. They have no specific target for offshore wind, but the current NECP shows 4 times increase in offshore overall wind capacity by 2030, and it is estimated that in Estonian waters, and there should be an overall at least a potential for 7 gigawatt. We also asked for an estimate for 2030, and it was said that it could be possible that 400 to 1,000 megawatt are installed by 2030. So far, there's no offshore wind farm in operation in Estonia. For Finland, there have been recently several new renewable energy and emission reduction measures implemented, and it was said that the overall target will most likely be updated in near future. Also in Finland, there are no capacity targets for offshore wind. However, the estimate is that by 2030, several wind farms will be under construction and by 2035 in operation. So far, there's one offshore wind farm in operation. For Germany, the national expansion target is currently revised, and the new targets aim at 80% of electric power consumption from renewable energies by 2030 and climate neutrality in electric power consumption by 2035. It is planned that by 2030, it should be 30 gigawatt installed capacity, by 2035, 40 gigawatt, by 2045, 70 gigawatt installed capacity. But this is, of course, for the North Sea and the Baltic Sea. So the estimate is that by 2030, 30 gigawatt are installed. So far, 72 wind farms are in operation in Germany, from which 4 of them are located in the Baltic Sea with 1,100 megawatt. Also in Latvia, the NECP, or the National Expansion Target, is currently under revision, and it was stated that considering the prospect induced by the European Green Deal as well as the Fit for 55 package, the current targets had been recognized as lacking sufficient ambition. Latvia does not have any targets for offshore energy generation. However, they estimate that by 2030, 600 to 800 megawatt will be installed. For Lithuania, the national expansion target is also under revision at the moment. It is planned that 1.4 gigawatt should be installed, and this should be already be done by 2030. And also in Lithuania, there's no wind farm in operation offshore yet. For Poland, the Ministry of Climate and Environment recently initiated its efforts to amend the energy policy of Poland until 2040, and it is expected that the new targets will be even more ambitious. It is planned that by 2030, 5.9 gigawatt will be installed, and by 2040, 11 gigawatt are installed. So the official or the unofficial estimate is also that 5.9 gigawatts will be installed by 2030. For Sweden, there has been an update that by 2040, 100% of electricity production will be from renewable energies. They have no targets specified for location or technology. However, the Swedish government has assigned the planning authority to develop marine spatial plan proposal offering space for 30 gigawatt installed capacity. They gave no estimation for 2030, and so far 4 offshore wind farms are in operation in Sweden. For Denmark, we didn't got the answers in time. However, we found a presentation which was published in line with the new climate agreement in Denmark by 2020. And here we took some of the numbers and information from. So as said, in Denmark, there has been a new climate agreement in 2020, and here the target was set that by 2030, there should be a cut in greenhouse gas emissions by 70%, and it should be already 100% electricity production from renewables, and by 2050, Denmark wants to become climate neutral. We haven't seen any plans presented in the presentation for the offshore energy generation. However, there has been the estimate that by 2030, 9 gigawatt should be installed offshore, from which 5 gigawatt are coming from energy islands. So there will be 1 energy island in the North Sea and 1 energy island in the Baltic Sea, located in the area of Bornholm. And these islands will serve as a hub for electricity connection and as a connector between countries. So I think these are very important for regional cooperation as well. And so far, 1,700 megawatt are in operation in Danish waters. So to have a short conclusion on all the country information we gained, we saw that all BSR member states are planning for offshore wind energy generation. However, the ambitions are different. So in countries with low population density, it is more feasible to put wind farms and photovoltaic on shore. And the less population, of course, the less energy is needed. So offshore energy production may be only for expert there. In usually all countries, areas suitable for offshore wind are determined in national MSPs. However, countries where they have high ambitions, they usually also have specific planning instruments beyond the MSP. We also asked the different experts to identify challenges related to offshore wind energy. And it was stated that there are conflicts between targets for climate neutrality and targets for nature protection, as well as conflicts with fishery interests and defense interests. Also, the availability of knowledge and experience of port infrastructure and construction assets, as well as supply chain capabilities, were seen as a challenge. Then some countries face a problem with financing, so the profitability of offshore project is not given everywhere, and also the allocation of sufficient financing was a topic raised. Timing is a big issue because there are large timescales between planning and project realization, and very often the timing problems are related to the integration into onshore electricity networks or electricity networks as a whole. Also, a big challenge related to timing is the very fast pace of technological development in this technology. It was also said that climatic conditions can pose a challenge. So, of course, the local wind yield is very important for offshore wind energy generation, but also in the northern parts, sea ice in winter may pose a challenge. So, some words regarding regional cooperation. Regional cooperation is needed especially for the improvement of the interconnectivity of electricity markets. So we should have meshed grids, hybrid projects like these energy islands. However, we have in a lot of sea basins already joint working groups that are set up and may support these regional cooperation on a sea basin scale. So, for example, for the North Sea, we have the North Sea Energy Cooperation called NSEC, and for the Baltic Sea, we have the Baltic Energy Market Interconnection Plan called BMIP. For the North Sea, just some words because it has been a very recent activity. The Esbjerg Declaration was published on 18th of May 2022, and here the North Sea member states stated that they will replace fossil fuels with European renewable energy from the North Sea, and this should be done with multiple connected offshore energy projects and hubs. And it is stated that they have a target for offshore wind of at least 65 gigawatt by 2030 and at least 150 gigawatt by 2050. So this 65 gigawatt by 2030 would already reach the goal of 60 gigawatt stated in the offshore strategy. However, also the Baltic Sea is very active. So already in 2020, the BMIP high-level group, which consisted of the European Commission as well as members from the Baltic Sea member states or ministers from the Baltic Sea member states, they declared to aim to work towards increased offshore wind electricity supplies and better transmission infrastructure across the Baltic Sea. And here it is emphasized that a significant increase in offshore energy can be most efficiently achieved through a cooperative regional approach. As most of us know, that the regional cooperation of the member states around the Baltic Sea is already high. And we should use these existing networks and the strategies to further support cost-efficient, sustainable expansion of offshore wind energy. So I think Elina will say also something on VASAB, HELCOM, the USBSR strategy. All these networks will become even more important. On the right-hand side, you see that there are ambition plans, most of them in a very early planning phase. However, yeah, a lot is ongoing here. So what to take home from this talk? We found that climate change, energy import dependence in combination with high unstable prices, as well as the war in Ukraine, pushes the EU to accelerate the switch to electrification and renewable energy. So the European Green Deal and the proposed amendment of the Renewable Energy Directive have the new targets of 55% greenhouse gas reduction by 2030 and a share of renewable energy of 45%. The existing NECPs define the national targets, for example, for greenhouse gas reduction and share in renewable energy by 2030, but need to be updated in 2023 to align the targets to the new target set on a European level. The EU offshore renewable strategy announces an EU goal of 300 gigawatt offshore wind capacity and 40 gigawatt ocean energy capacity by 2050. We saw, especially from the country information, that the BSR member states have very different ambitions, are at different stages and face different challenges in offshore wind project realization. However, all of them are active in this area and with this technology. And I'd like to underline that regional cooperation is really important for the improvement of the interconnectivity of electricity markets. And it's also very important to solve conflicts at sea, as the one stated with defense interests, with the fishery, and also with nature conservation. Thank you very much for your attention.
Yes, thank you, Nele. And almost right on time. Unfortunately, that leaves us very little time for the interesting questions that have been popping in. So I will have noted them down for the discussion later, especially the question of Mr. Volstad, Ms. Kuh-Stenzel, and really also the one of Mr. Schubert, because I think they will be very suited for the panel discussion later on. The one question I think we can answer really quickly is, do you know if in the targets and plans for Finland, the Åland Islands were also considered?
I don't think so. We actually also asked Åland Island for answers, but we didn't receive any, and I didn't include it here. But I think it's not included in the Finland.
So, so potentially more capacity there, yes, still to be found. Great, thank you. And I'm sorry I have to cut this short here to be a little bit in the time frame. The next presentation would be by Elina. Elina Veidemane is Deputy Head of the VASAB Secretariat. She's assisting in the VASAB cooperation and its activities and coordinating the update of the VASAB Vision 2040. Elina joined VASAB in 2015, and she has previously worked at the Latvian Ministry of Environmental Protection and Regional Development. And there she was also preparing the concept for the national MSP process. So, Elina, thanks for agreeing to give a presentation and tell us all about VASAB.
Yeah, thank you, Kai, for a very nice introduction. And yeah, hello again from my side. I hope you see full screen, everything is working. Yes? Okay.
Yes. Yes.
Okay. So yeah, and as Nele already said, yeah, I will give some overview of, from macro-regional perspective and also about VASAB cooperation in the Baltic Sea region. But before I go on, I believe I should give some introduction of what VASAB is. And VASAB actually is the acronym for a longer title. It's Vision and Strategies around the Baltic Sea. And it is a macro-regional cooperation on spatial planning and development targeted among the relevant ministries. And this year, VASAB is celebrating the 30th anniversary, actually. It is composed of the countries coming from, like, allocating around the Baltic Sea, as the title suggests, and it is guided by ministers responsible for spatial planning and development. But between the ministerial conferences, the cooperation is steered by a VASAB Committee on Spatial Planning and Development. And the VASAB Committee is composed of senior officials coming from those ministries responsible for spatial planning and development. And the committee is also following the rotating chairmanship principle, meaning that every year there is another country taking a leading role. And so in this regard, this year VASAB is having a German chairmanship, and also this webinar is organized in a framework of the German chairmanship. And yeah, and VASAB cooperation is supported by VASAB Secretariat, where I am working at, and the Secretariat since 2007 is located in Riga in Latvia. And VASAB in general, it serves as a platform for discussions, for knowledge exchange, and also discussing the future territorial developments and also setting the territorial perspectives. And as a result, VASAB also prepared the spatial vision for the Baltic Sea region, demonstrating how the region would develop in the future and what developments will take in which place or territory, and also how these developments can coexist with other competing interests and also with environmental protection concerns. And also such territorial approach can better visualize the potential conflicts as well as indicate potential opportunities for joint work, joint effort, and also synergies towards desirable future. And such spatial vision also gives a territorial perspective, sets the goals for coherent spatial development, and also propose concrete actions how to make the vision come true. And as you can see from the three pictures here, there have been several attempts in visioning work for different time horizons. As you can see, the first vision was elaborated soon after the VASAB was established, and for that time, for the Baltic Sea region, it was the first time when such spatial approach was used. Then later on, it was updated in VASAB long-term perspective that focused more on the integration, internal and also external integration of the region. And now this year, VASAB presents the recent work on the new draft VASAB vision for 2040. And it updates the previous document as well as builds on the spatial elements that were identified by the very first vision from the 90s. And the new vision also considers the current challenges and development trends that we are facing today, like pandemic reality, the demographic challenges, the climate change impacts, digitalization, and also in the light of the recent war in Ukraine, also we can add an overall security of the region to that challenges as well. And the vision's goal is to achieve territorial cohesion by 2040, and is looking for the answers how the Baltic Sea region would look like and be evolved by then. And here, the healthy Baltic Sea is the core asset of the region, around which the region prospers, and also where diversity can coexist in harmony. Also, quality of life is important, and it's characterized by clear shift to sustainability and also wiser use of technologies, while the cooperation and solidarity and integration are the key principles for successful vision. And to achieve the vision also we need adequate and timely policies and also concrete actions that can help to cope with challenges already starting from today, and also successfully implement the vision. For now, the vision has been forwarded to stakeholder consultations for reviews, for feedbacks and opinions. And using the opportunity, also I'd like to invite you to get acquainted with the document, and also you are welcome to share your thoughts with us. So more information can be found at our website. And just for your information, all the feedbacks are kindly welcome by middle of July. So there's still some time to go. And a little bit more about the vision itself. It is structured along so-called metaphors, as we call them. Each one of the metaphors are referring to spatial element of the vision and is analyzed in context of potential future developments by 2040 and beyond. Here, the pearls represent different sizes of human settlements, and here starting from rural settlement till the larger metropolitan areas, and here the main focus is on quality of life in these cities, but not only from social economic performance point of view, but also regarding the adaptation to climate change impacts. The strings represent physical and visual connections and focus on green transport, energy supply, as well as virtual connectivity. The third metaphor, called patches, represents sustainable and healthy ecosystems and also specific types of uses like sustainable agriculture, energy production sites, cultural heritage, nature protection, etc. And the system, the fourth element, represents spatial planning advancements, different spatial planning concepts, also cooperation across the different levels, systems and sectors, also across the borders, also across the land and the sea. And if a vision is looked from the perspective of offshore energy, we see that there will be increased demand in the future, and that our cities will require more energy, and I should say also even more green energy in order to achieve the carbon neutrality goals and also to become more digital, more smarter. The transport, either on the land or on the sea, will be looking for more greener fuel solution. It means also the ports will be looking more greener in the future and require greener energy. The data, we are using more data every day, and so it means also data connections and data storage will require a sustainable approach here. And to serve those ambitions, vision indicates the need for carbon neutral, secure, and also well-connected energy production sites that are also integrated into functional and secure system. As also it was pointed by Nele previously, that EU and also national ambitions for offshore wind energy require quite significant areas, and which also means that offshore wind energy developments will need to be carefully discussed and coordinated in MSP and also stakeholder processes, ensuring that other uses, other sectors, as well as environmental interests are not diminished. The vision also encourages to apply multi-use concept and explore how the possibilities to combine CUs, especially in the wind energy production side, that will have quite significant aerial implications, and also consider how these developments at the sea will affect those living by the coast. And when talking about offshore wind energy, another collaboration framework should be mentioned. Since 2010, VASAB has established collaboration with HELCOM, so-called HELCOM VASAB Maritime Spatial Planning Working Group. And HELCOM is another pan-Baltic organization and is main governing body for Baltic Marine Protection Convention. And here in the joint work between spatial planners coming from VASAB side and marine environmental experts coming from HELCOM side, the joint work has helped to set Baltic Sea region as a forerunner on maritime spatial planning, even at the EU scale, I should say. But also this cooperation has enabled a joint learning and a better understanding of planning systems in each country, so about the circumstances, and also has discussed how to ensure transboundary and transparent dialogue processes in into spatial planning, how to apply ecosystem-based approach and what it means, and also how to structure data that should be used for maritime spatial planning, and how to ensure that these data are available, but also that they are compatible with data coming from other countries' maritime spatial planning. And such cooperation framework can serve also as a support to mutual dialogue for offshore wind energy development. Also, it was pointed by Nele. Sorry. And here also Nele mentioned BEMIP, the cooperation Baltic Energy Market Interconnection Plan. And here also the HELCOM VASAB working group initiated some first exchange to explore the further collaboration with this group as well. And the main thematic framework for HELCOM VASAB cooperation is given by Baltic MSP roadmap, which sets the overall goal, objectives for coherent MSP processes in the Baltic Sea, and also the countries have agreed on common activities to implement this roadmap by 2030. And this roadmap was adopted last year, and it will lead the countries through a new planning cycle when the implementation of adopted maritime spatial plans is starting to take place, as well as assumingly also the expansion of offshore wind energy will be present. And therefore, it is crucial to understand those implications that these developments will take, how also other policies will interfere with targets that are set in maritime spatial plans, also how these development processes can contribute to achieve a good environmental status of marine waters, and how to ensure also sustainable blue economy in order to minimize economic losses and also to protect ecosystem services. Another topic is added also the climate change as it is a global challenge, and there is a need to better understand how sectors and also marine environment will be affected by climate change, and what is the role of maritime spatial planning to adapt those impacts. And also it was mentioned as the Baltic Sea region actually has a long cooperation traditions, and also is involved also in another framework called EU Strategy for the Baltic Sea Region. And here it is like an agreement among the member states around the Baltic Sea, working together in 14 thematic policy areas to tackle common challenges and also to benefit from common opportunities. And here VASAB is an active partner as the leading coordinator for policy area spatial planning, and through this network VASAB has a possibility to reach out not only to respective ministries or institutions but also to stakeholders in other sectors, and also engage them into a spatial planning policy building and ensure the dialogue across the sector, but also across the different levels. And this framework also allows to build linkages with other thematic areas like transport, energy, safe shipping, etc. via various cooperation projects and exchange activities. And these activities and projects particularly help to identify the bottlenecks or test potential solutions coming or suggested from experts that also can be applied further in our work. Okay, so that was a short insight into VASAB cooperation, and maybe if there's any questions, I'm also happy to answer.
Yes, thank you, Elina. I think given the time and that we wanted to have a short little break, maybe we should keep the most urgent questions for the panel later. Yes, and we have prepared so that you're not bored during the break. We have prepared another questionnaire for you, and also please be back in time at 10 o'clock. Don't miss George and Diego's excellent presentation on shipping and the use of maritime space. It is quite riveting. So up until then, Elina's going to put up a questionnaire, and then we take a break till 10 o'clock. And welcome back from the coffee break. And you can be sure I will look up who put in there that they're doing squats in the coffee break. Although I can go with coffee and strawberry and a lot of things there, I have to say. Anyways, we're coming new to the more technical side of things. The presentation will be by George Savvopoulos and Diego Cerquenich. George is a registered civil engineer. He is a consultant and an experienced project manager in the delivery of medium to complex heavy commercial and industrial infrastructure projects. His experience including ports, harbors, dry bulk, liquid bulk, and shipping container terminals, flood defenses, and seawater intake stations. He's currently offering consultancy services to insurers, lenders, and lessors in the shipping industry, and specializing in data-based due diligence advisory and services. His areas of expertise include database shipping, traffic assessment, probabilistic navigational risk assessment, and vessel emissions assessments. He is responsible for the inception and technical lead in the development of a portal application to calculate the carbon efficiency of ships for the implementation of the Poseidon principles. Diego, on the other hand, is a master mariner with 15 years of seagoing experience, having sailed on a variety of ocean-going ships from passenger to chemical tanker, container, and multi-purpose vessel, and he was in command of bulk carriers. His shore-based experience ranges from the role of expert witness in arbitration and litigation to the marine advisor in the assessment of navigational risks related to port and offshore developments. So, I'm very happy that you could make it and give us a short talk on the shipping and the use of maritime space in the times of offshore wind energy expansion in the Baltic. So thank you, and the floor is yours.
Thank you for the kind introduction, Kai, and I hope everybody can see my screen so we can commence. What we'll be talking about today is shipping and the use of maritime space in times of offshore wind energy expansion in the Baltics. Before we start, I will tell you a few words about our company. We are a maritime consultancy supporting three main sectors: shipping, where Diego and I belong, offshore wind, and oil and gas. And we are a fairly large organization, and we are addressing the issues that are currently of relevance. Parts of our business are designing green vessels. We are now developing, and we have just launched a tool for the accounting of ports emissions. So we are trying to support the move of the industry, of the shipping industry and the shipping world towards decarbonization. The content of our presentation today will be an introduction in the use of the maritime space. Then I will tell you a bit on how we perform risk analysis, and we will use a recent case study that we performed within the German jurisdiction. And then I will hand you over to my colleague Diego, who is going to talk to you about navigation simulation and how we use that in conjunction with risk modeling to assess the new environment formed from a navigational perspective. In terms of the use of maritime space, we all perceive the sea as something large and open without obstacles, but this is rarely the case, and it's increasingly becoming not to be the case. We are all here today talking about offshore wind farms, so you would expect that part of the space is used by offshore wind, but there are other uses, like my favorite one, which is shipping, that uses corridors within this maritime space and thus occupies an area in the sea. And then, of course, there are other uses, as Nele mentioned earlier, such as environmental protection areas, and also quite timely with the recent security concerns, there are areas that are used for military practice, etc. This all feeds into forming and updating maritime spatial planning, which is extremely important in understanding and designating which user can use which part of the sea, so that we can maintain consistency, safety, and the smooth function of all users that utilize the space. The way we do that, and that's a snapshot of what we see currently in the area of the Baltic that we looked at in our recent study. You can see that the first thing we have to do is identify, from the shipping perspective, the areas that are used by shipping traffic. The way we do that is we split the sea into small squares. We count how many vessels crossed each of these squares in a year, and that gives us an indication of which are the routes that are being used by the vessels. Of course, we have the existing offshore installations that you can see now in the red pictures, and traffic moves around them. So you can see how a typical traffic day would be moving in the space of the Baltic Sea. Of course, in addition to existing installations, we have ones that are currently under construction. And in the left-hand side, for instance, you see Arcady Sost, and the first pile for which was installed yesterday. And this is something that is upcoming. And then we go into planning and knowing that certain areas have been designated for a certain use, in the particular case, offshore wind, as we can see in the blue areas, which are going to be developed in the future. And as we try to expand and maximize the use of space for offshore wind, trying to move away from fossils, questions come up of whether additional areas can also be used for offshore wind safely, and what the implications are in terms of maritime safety and shipping. Looking at the picture in the Baltic Sea for the future, you can see that there is even more area that's expected to be developed. Obviously, this is non-final or cast in stone, but this is current best knowledge. You see some question marks on the Swedish side, and the reason is that instead of nominating large areas for offshore wind development there, it's open to developers to propose areas, and they are considered on an individual basis. So you can see what the picture could look like in the future. And talking about risk and accidents, we need to acknowledge that accidents do happen. And as the HELCOM database kindly lends us access to the information, we can see that in the past 3 decades, we had 23 vessel collisions in the area of our interest. So what we need to do from our end is to study the changes in the risk profile of the area that is introduced by each proposed change, quantify the risk increment, so the risk that we are adding or removing from the existing system, and then identify and propose the means for mitigating this risk in the area of interest for a study. And that, of course, all feeds into a risk analysis that informs spatial planning and leads to potential updates in the future. Going into the aspect of risk analysis, apologies, we will look at it based on a case that we have currently done in the German jurisdiction. When we talk about deriving the risk profile of the area of interest, it looks a bit like what you see in the picture. So we model the existing traffic. We look at what the current risk is in the system. You can see that there are certain routes that are of higher risk. And in our case, it is the main route into the deeper Baltic, so leading basically from the Sound into the Eastern Baltic. And then you've got secondary routes, which you can see that have lower risk. We look at risk in legs, which looks at vessel-to-vessel collisions, at waypoints, which are the dots in the diagram that inform us on the risk on crossings and where traffic is merging. And then, of course, we look at groundings or allisions with fixed objects, in our case, wind farms, etc. So we try to understand the changes that each plan entails, model it, and then quantitatively determine its impact on risk. To do that, we have to start from the maritime development plans, try to picture how the space will look like at the time that we consider in the future where we do the study. And then we consider these development plans, we consider potential changes in ports that can bring additional traffic or potential economic forecasts for the future. And then we adapt and run future scenarios on this basis to inform the study. It all starts with analyzing existing traffic, current traffic patterns. And you can see in the example here, the routes used by merchant vessels in the part of the Baltic we're looking at in the southwest. You can see in the middle picture at the top, the routes used by passenger vessels, service vessels to the offshore wind farms that currently exist and operate, the movements of the fishing fleet, and then fishing activity, meaning stationary or low speed movement of fishing vessels. All this feeds into building a risk model where we understand what is the change expected to be in the navigational routes as we introduce new areas of offshore wind development in the space. You can see, for instance, that we start with the existing arrangement at the left. At the center, the red lines show existing route alignments that were moved to reflect where the green lines are in each of the figures. And then ultimately for the question that we were looking at, whether the space between Arcady Sost 1 and the existing planning areas could be used, we had to divert the traffic that uses that area into what will be formed after such a change can be introduced. What we do is we look at this process on a step-by-step basis. We consider the risk increment that is introduced by each of the intermediate steps, and that helps us identify the rate of introduction of risk at each stage of modeling. When we analyze and understand the risk, we have to go into mitigation, and Diego will pick up here and talk slightly about what we are looking at when we try to mitigate these risks. Diego?
Yes, thank you, George. Yeah, well, mitigations is a difficult task. Sometimes the mitigations are not effective, and in other occasions can sensibly reduce the overall risk. The process we consider is to start from the minimal impact of any mitigation, that any mitigation might affect the surrounding area of the study. And then move further to drastic solution in case, but eventually to meet a sort of balance between the pros and cons. So in this particular case, we had to consider alternatives for the vessel that were using routes passing through the area of the future developments in EO2. And we noticed that the existing recommended route passing from Arkona Buoy, northeast of Rügen Island, to Sassnitz and Venusia, if projected to the northwest, had the peculiarity to lay at over 2 nautical miles from the offshore installation of Cadiz Ost-1 and the Baltic Sea, keeping basically the same orientation. And another peculiarity was that the vessel transiting along that route, you see the green line that you can see on the slide, was crossing almost at 90 degrees the main artery of the traffic flow from the southwest to the northeast, basically from the Cadetrine to Bronum Islands, TSS. So the main traffic in the South Baltic Sea. So the potential of the alternative would have not upset the current behavior of the officer of the watch, because of course what we were looking at was to find something that an officer of the watch could have logically act while transiting that area. So without making a total disruption of what was in place. And we realized that this was basically the best option that we could have had. And in the next slide, after we introduced this mitigation, we also redirect the traffic across a lateral distribution that was oriented along this recommended route. And the comparison of analyzed risk are depicted in the next slide.
Thank you. Oops, thank you, Diego. And apologies, let me reshare the slides. So looking further into the end of the risk study, we have now modeled and looked at each intermediate stage, and we do that in 2 stages. We do it for the current traffic and current vessel sizes, and we go through the changes that are introduced in each scenario, and we can see how risk is added based on the red line into the system. Then we try mitigation scenarios that we have come up in the way that Diego explains, and we can see their impact in helping us reduce take-back part of the risk increment that is introduced. You can see in this case that the final introduction of risk is about 2.5%, which is acceptable. And when we protract this into the future, you can see that by doing the changes in different scenarios and considering them with different vessel sizes, future vessel sizes and future vessel traffic volumes, in some cases, it is not a consistent change from the current, but you have a milder change, as we noted by the development stage 3, which was the introduction of the additional strip. What we have to consider is risk changes in the smaller areas, therefore, where traffic will change substantially. So we also zoom in and look at risk around individual nodes and points on the route. And then based on all these findings combined, we can report the results of the study and educate the MSP development process. I will hand you back over to Diego, who's going to talk about navigation simulation now, and effectively the way that we create an environment of the change, the sea, and we test scenarios that are of concern to find out if everything is in line.
Yes, thank you, George. Let me just see, can you see my screen? Is my screen sharing? Can you confirm, George?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, thanks. Sure. So I won't bother you much longer than what we have done already. So Navigation simulation. Basically, one of the challenges of a navigation risk assessment is to validate the outcomes of the study. So we can project traffic to redirect stream flows or applying change even to ACE navigation or routing, but in the end it would be an academic exercise yet to be confirmed. So to validate and verify the actual impact of a newly developed offshore installation, one method is to simulate sailing scenarios in defined hotspots. With assistance of the Wärtsilä Navitrain Pro 5000, we are able to recreate an actual model of existing traffic, tailoring the scenario according to the conclusion of the study. In a few words, we analyze the current existing traffic, we assume future projection of the shipping traffic in the area, we introduce meteorological data considered in the study, and we then create potential hazard to navigation in order to maximize the potentiality of a worst case scenario. Once the scenario is built up, we select a design vessel taken from the available data set, and this can be one with the most frequent transit in the area or a vessel with the least maneuverability characteristic present in the data set, or even both as we did in our case, and run simulation in predetermined conditions. So the model then can also be provided to stakeholders as long as they have access to a simulation machine or even to reproduce the simulation at our premises. For training purpose, basically. So following the modeling of the risk comparison of our study, the hotspot indicating the major risk to navigating vessel was found, as mentioned earlier, to be at western end of our Cadiz SwAM installation due to frequency of transit and modification of existing routing. So the aim of the simulation in this case was not to validate the mitigation measures suggested, but it focused on the safety distance at which a vessel can safely navigate west of the wind farm. Based on this fundamental, a scenario was built up, recreating a crossing situation for a northbound vessel, having southbound vessels transiting on her port side, and vessels crossing from her starboard side, so that our ship is required to keep out of the way and avoid to cross ahead of other vessels. To make the scenario spicier, 2 stationary fishing vessels were added to shut the door for an evasive maneuver passing west of the installation. The vessels selected for the simulation were a Ro-Ro packs to represent the ship with the most frequent transits in the area, and a tanker in ballast condition to represent the least maneuverable vessel in the fleet. So the existing traffic, which extends outside of the area of the maneuver so that additional scenario can be run, was taken from the busiest 3 hours identified in the 2 years data set that we have analyzed. So what you can see here now is basically the simulation has appeared on the simulator machine, the Wärtsilä simulation machine. And here is pieces of a video showing like our ship, in this case, is the ferry boat with the particulars where you can see the displacement and all the other data. And this is the mitigation that we have suggested, the extension of the recommended route. And as you can see from here, the extension of the recommended route lays about 3,100 meters from our scenario. So we were focusing basically to the safety distance of a vessel rather than whether or not it was safe to navigate along the recommended route. And here it comes. You can see the visualization with the Rügen Island, then the existing vessels passing southbound, and these were taken from the actual fleet present in the dataset. And this is the scenario created with hazard, the installations of Cadiz SwAM, and the cardinal buoy limiting the safety zone of the installation. So we were sailing with a single pump, steering pump, just to recreate what an officer of the watch would have followed in open sea. And as the vessel approached, so you can see that getting closer, our officer of the watch realized that he cannot pass through, and he had to alter the course with setting the rudder at 20 degrees to starboard. And you can see the alteration. There's also the representation of the wind. We use adverse weather conditions, so wind, swells, and current was pushing our vessels towards the offshore installation. Then the officer was realized that it can't be kept clear from the second feeder vessel, and he set the rudder hard to starboard. So checking the passage on the port with the other two. You can see on the right of the screen with the visualization from the top view. Then the two stationary fishing vessels that shut basically the door to allow the vessel passing in that area, and then easily reaching the bow cross of the cardinal buoy of the. So you see that there is still a distance between the bow and the installation's limit, but then the drifting will take the vessel towards the installation, and eventually will end up in being very close to the limit of the safety zone. And this is the, oh, sorry, skip month. Really does not respond anymore. Oh, sorry, guys. And this basically was the outcome of the simulations. So with the ferry boat, we have found out that a distance of 690 meters was the least to allow the vessel to take an evasive maneuver to the starboard in a conservative manner. So not with full speed, in adverse weather, not setting the rudder hard to starboard at the time of the initial alteration, of course. And on the right end of the screen, you can see the simulation that was run with the tanker in ballast condition, where the distance for her was 1,370 meters. So of course, much wider than the ferry boat. So the simulation were for this particular study were done with the methodology just explained. However, there are infinite scenarios that can be adjusted accordingly. Also, as I said before, to train mariners or pilots in pure visibility or in darkness conditions, and not only to validate mitigations that are used in a navigation or risk assessment study. So our simulation and here. So thank you, and if you have any questions.
Yes, thank you. And informative as always. I think we have time for a very short question, and I see that Nele has actually asked. How do we choose the weather conditions, or did we also look for the simulation of weather conditions?
Yes, the study that we have carried out implied also the use of Meteosan data. So Meteosan data were collected for the area of the study, and from those data we selected the worst, let's say the 98% of the worst, not the 100% of the adverse condition affecting our vessel, which might be quite unrealistic since must be current and swell and wind at the same time in the same directions. That not often, let's say, happen.
Okay. And the vessels, Kira asked that you used were actually real vessels that you've seen going there, right?
Yes, correct. That were taken from the fleet that we had present in the AIS dataset that we have analyzed. Okay.
Great, thank you. And as can be expected of engineers, you actually are on time. Thanks again, and I'm looking forward to the discussion later on. Which brings me, yeah, thanks. Which brings me to the next presentation, which is prepared by Markku Viitasalo. I hope this is close to the right pronunciation. And Elina Virtanen, although Elina was not able to join us today, correct? So I give you a brief introduction. Markku is a marine biologist who from early childhood has moved on and at the sea. and really doing work and leisure activities. He's working in the Finnish Environment Institute, or SYKE, and his work focuses on marine biodiversity, marine conservation, and the sustainable use of marine areas. He also coordinates WELMU, the inventory program for underwater marine diversity, which has since 2004 collected data on marine species and habitats in Finland. And WELMU data have enabled the analysis of ecosystem-based siting of wind power, which actually will be his topic today. On his educational background, he also has been a professor at SYKE for actually marine, for a number of different topics, but also including marine spatial planning from 2009 to 2011. So and nobody better qualified to get us into the topic than you.
Thank you, Kai, for the lengthy introduction. Pleasure to be here and present some of our results on the ecosystem-based planning of wind power siting. Now, I hope you should see my screen.
Yes.
And
yes,
it should be on the presentation mode, right?
Yes, yes.
Excellent. Yes, now that we heard really very interesting talks about basic profitability questions and also practical issues that may be encountered at sea, I would like to present an ecologist's perspective to the need of increasing wind power offshore. And here, obviously, my focus will be on ecological impact avoidance, but we use an approach where you can actually balance the economic potentials and human interests in this dilemma. The presentation was prepared by me and Elina, but it's based on wide collaboration with a lot of people in different institutes. It is a paper published this spring in Renewable and Sustainable Energy Reviews called Balancing Profitability of Energy Production, Societal Impacts and Biodiversity in Offshore Wind Farm Design. And it was funded by the Academy of Finland Strategic Research Council. But without further ado, the main question in our study was where to locate offshore wind energy. And of course, the first thing to look at is the profitability for all entrepreneurs and even nations. It is of course indispensable that the energy production is profitable, and for the consumers, the electricity will be fair price. But then there are 4 other issues that we have tried to take into account. And first is restrictions, of course, where you cannot place wind power. These would be military areas, different conservation areas, etc. Thirdly, we can also see that some areas are better suited for building offshore wind energy than others, perhaps close to ports or other human installations. There might be visual less of a visual problem to have offshore wind energy. Fourth will be human interest, societal impacts, what could be affecting people that well, we want to avoid ordinary people opposing building of the wind energy. And finally, there will be environmental concerns. We call them biodiversity in this context. And all these issues could be balanced or analyzed in a simple overlay analysis, and this is what has been done commonly in different areas of the world, but that creates an on-off solution to the very complex problem, and therefore we have decided to use an analytical decision support and spatial prioritization tool called zonation, which has specifically been developed for ecologically based land use planning, and it has commonly been used for conservation planning, but it's as well usable for any type of siting or impact avoidance analysis. And I'm now going to go through the 5 different baskets of issues and data that we have been using. All of the data are spatial data that exists and is available from open sources or otherwise taken from our analysis. And going first to the profitability, even though I am personally not an economist or engineer for that matter, we had a colleague called Juho Lappalainen who made a very detailed spatial life cycle cost analysis for building offshore wind energy in the Finnish coast. And the analysis includes all costs during the project lifetime, from all bulks and salaries of seamen and everything basically that you can imagine, from the building, development and consenting until the decommissioning and disposal of the installation. So that was really very nice advanced study, and it creates a spatial layer where the levelized cost of energy is actually determined, and which shows where it's most profitable to produce offshore wind energy. And Juho published this as his kind of master's thesis for Aalto University, and it was so good study that he was immediately recruited for a wind energy firm called Hyötytuuli, and he's been working there ever since. And as you can see, the most profitable low-cost areas in this picture are highlighted by red, and you can see that it's a little bit balanced towards the south of Finland, mostly because of ice conditions and other costs of energy that may rise in the northern parts of Finnish Sea area. Anyhow, keep this picture in mind. Next, there are simple restrictions like military areas, conservation areas, shipping lanes, anchoring areas for ships. Of course, one issue in the Baltic Sea and Finland, especially unfortunately these days, the military radars, weather radars, and etc. Unfortunately, we did not have clear information on the military radars, even though the Army of Finland is usually very negative on building offshore wind energy in the southern parts of Finland, in the Gulf of Finland, for reasons that you can guess yourself. Anyhow, then there was some generic rules of building of wind power offshore, and these were taken also into account. Then some enablers, proximity of industrial areas, so-called spoiled landscapes, and anoxic or hypoxic bottoms that are dead zones. Ecological were taken as an enabler for building wind power. The truth is that course, most of the industrial areas are close to the shore, and it remains to be seen if these close coastal areas are useful for windmills. You can see it later. Then societal impacts. Usually people react to visual and noise cues of windmills and don't like them being very close to their summer cottages or housing, and also boating people, of course, don't want large installations being close to the main harbors and so on. And secondly, we also did look at livelihoods, commercial fishing and aquaculture, and determined where these might conflict with the interests of offshore wind energy. And this example shows how we did the visual analysis. The question was from where the offshore wind energy installations would be seen to a cottage, summer cottage, and you might know that Finns have a lot of summer cottages, both on the lakes and also on seaside. And we did a so-called viewshed analysis, and if we focus on this area surrounded by red square here in the southwest Finland, the color code shows from how many summer cottages wind turbine 200 meters high would be seen. And the color scale, which you can see on the left picture, actually the highest numbers of cottages would be demarcated with whitish color, not reddish. So if wind turbines would be placed on these areas surrounded by red circles, they would be seen from 2,000 cottages around them. So these areas would clearly be the areas that we should want to avoid if we want to avoid any objection or opposal from people maybe being offended by having offshore windmills in the very, very close proximity. And in the other end of the scale, the green and yellowish areas would be the ones where there are very few cottages, or where you can place the windmills without much disturbance to the cottages. And you can also already see that obviously these are more offshore. But fishing, reddish color here shows commercial fishing areas, and the greenish areas coastal fishing areas, and these should be avoided, of course, for the building. And finally, regarding the biodiversity, we used the data collected by VELMU, the Finnish inventory program for underwater diversity. We have been collecting data on geo and biodiversity from 2004, and you can see the enormous amount of sites visited on the left-hand pictures. Actually, today we have about 170,000 sites visited, and we have perhaps world's best information, direct information on underwater life, algae, aquatic plants, invertebrates, and fish. And these data were used to create species models and species distribution models that were used for taking into account biodiversity. Other types of information, we of course used EU Habitats Directive, habitat types, threatened habitat types, and threatened species from our red lists. And geologically important areas, fish reproduction areas, bird migration routes, important areas for sea eagles and seals. Some pictures, what the data looks like. This is EU Habitats Directive, Annex 1, habitats, estuaries, lagoons in purple, estuaries in brownish, large shallow inlets and bays, boreal Baltic narrow inlets, reefs in the open sea, sandbanks covered by seawater, esker islands, their underwater parts, and also underwater parts of boreal Baltic islets and small islands. These would be areas to avoid. Then threatened habitat types from Finnish red lists. These data were modeled data, for instance, bladder wrack or habitats dominated by bladder wrack, things to be avoided. Then this shows both fish reproduction areas with bluish color in the inner bays, and greenish, dark greenish lines on sea would be bird migration, main bird migration routes, data given by BirdLife. So in total we had 171 spatial layers, profitability layers were 5, restriction 16, enables 3, societal layers 25, and biodiversity 122. And what the zonation does is it takes all these spatial layers into account and calculates the least suitable area, and then it deletes the cells from the map, these unprofitable or unsuitable areas, and then recalculates everything based on the remaining data. Again, removes the least valuable or profitable areas, and then iterates hundreds of times this analysis and creates a balanced solution for suitability of offshore wind. And this creates a map which is a very balanced solution, not an on-off solution like an overlay analysis would be. It creates a color-coded map, and the winner is the suitable areas for offshore wind energy in the coming map will be in red, and this is the map. And here you can see that some areas have been highlighted, and now remember the profitability map for economic interests. You remember that the northern areas were not very profitable, but when we balance all these interests, it becomes realistic to produce wind energy also in the northern areas. And what I'm very proud of is that these data have been directly used in decision making in Finland. They were used in the maritime spatial plans in Finland that were published last year. You can see here different codes, but note that the purple areas would be those that have been meant for energy production. And we can compare this, or first focus on one of the areas. Just as an example, you can see that these purple areas would be highlighted by the MSP of Finland to be suitable for wind energy. And if we compare it to the original analysis, you can see that the areas are pretty much the same. maybe in the northern areas, the MSB has smaller area due to the emphasis on maritime traffic, but otherwise it's pretty well taken from science into the MSB. And now finally, actually, one of the new proposals for building wind energy would be here around this area. There's a planned windmill park, 70 to 100 mills each, maximum 350 meters high, approximately maximum 1,300 megawatts that is being planned, and this is a very nice example of ecosystem placement of wind energy. Of course, it will be subject to a very profound environmental impact assessment, and we'll see if the plans will be realized, but from our perspective, it seems that it's placed as if we would have been proposing them to be placed. So to conclude, it's possible to design offshore wind energy taking into account biodiversity, societal impacts, and profitability, economic profitability, and balance them in a creative way. In Finland, suitable areas can be found in all marine areas, even the south, even though we know that for the current time being, it's perhaps not accepted by the military, but it depends on how the future goes. And also the analysis was and can be used in the MSB process. So of course, the actual implementation still need more detailed impact assessments, and if all this is done based on ecosystem-based planning, it is still possible to increase wind power in a quite remarkable amount. Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for this excellent talk. I think we have just a couple of minutes for some of the urgent questions that have popped up. For example, could you tell us why you think dead zones are considered as enablers?
Well, at least for the ecosystem, most of them will probably remain dead zones in the future. I'm not speaking of the areas that are in the close vicinity of coasts, because we of course hope that with the environmental mitigation programs, the oxygen conditions of the coastal areas will be improving. But as for the offshore areas, there are still areas that probably for Baltic Sea hydrography and oceanographical reasons will remain anoxic. But it's fair to ask, of course, whether this is reasonable, because building in such areas could be also risky, because the building itself could create currents that will pump up the nutrients and hypoxic water into the surface layer, and that might be risky. That's a valid point. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. And then I think one last question we have time for. What is the hierarchy between the layers, or were they all equally important?
Well, again, zonation has a certain system for valuing different ecological values. And for instance, very rare and threatened species would be highest up in the ranking. And then going down, there will be different types of ecological features that will be ranked lower and lower, depending on either their commonness in the seascape or due to different other values like ecological keystone species or habitat building species might be important because they provide habitats and food and reproduction areas for other species and so on. So there is a ranking, and Johannesson is able to take this type of ranking into account so that it avoids or indicates areas that have a very high biodiversity value and those that have extremely low biodiversity value and everything in between. So there is a map, a full map of ecological values that is the basis for the analysis. So
okay, yes. So it just please go on.
So the answer to Kaira's question is that all biodiversity areas were not included as no-go areas. There is a gradient. Only some of them will be no-go areas because of indispensable values, like some last habitats of a very threatened species that would be no-go areas. But to say it out loud, most of these were close to the coasts, and as you could see from the map, no areas that we propose were closer than about 15 kilometers from the shore. So most of the highest ecological values were saved due to the distance to the shore, and that is exactly the way how Johannesson works. It balances the different values in a way that avoid the highest values from all perspectives, human interest and biodiversity, and highlights the areas that are most profitable from economic point of view, and balances these into a map that you just saw.
Well, thanks for this explanation, and I'm afraid this is all what we have time for the chat questions. However, Markku, you can feel free to answer these questions directly in the chat if you like, because I think most of them are like really specific to your talk. And with this, I thank you once again, and we will go into our second little break, and I'll have to ask you to be back at 11 and tune in to Joachim's talk, which will be excellent. I can promise that much. So, to found an instant tradition, we also have another question prepared for your coffee break. So, please answer the question. Please be back in time, and I'll see you at 11. Yes, hello, and welcome back. Nice to see that it seems mostly sunny where people are. We are coming now to our last presentation, which is by Joacim Johannesson. Joacim is a senior analyst at the Swedish Agency for Marine and Water Management at SwAM. He's been working on MSP since 2011. He's the co-chair of the German VASAB Maritime Spatial Planning Working Group, and he's the Swedish delegate in the EU Member States Expert Group on Maritime Spatial Planning. His background is an Master of Science in Business Administration from the University of Gothenburg. And his topic today will be the Swedish planning approach for offshore wind energy from MSP to project level. Yes, we can see.
Okay, so you can see the presentation, yes?
Yes.
Yes. So now it's the presentation mode.
Now it's the presentation mode. Just need to swap one more
Yeah.
time and then we're good.
Yeah. I will talk about MSP and our planning for...
I'm sorry when I said the presentation mode is the actual presenter presentation mode. So I think if you can swap that one more time between the two screens you have.
Yes, there was some, yeah. So let's see, it should be this one then. Now it will be the right one, right?
Yeah, if you click and we can see.
Yeah.
Yes, excellent.
Okay, so, well, I will talk about the MSP and the planning of offshore energy in Sweden, the planning that has been done and the planning that will be done. I have 4 parts. First, I will present the kind of state of play. I then talk about the new ambitions from the government and the new planning round that has just started. And I will also present the current valid maritime special plans that were adopted a few months ago. And I will also talk about the actual project boom or project application boom that we have currently, and the opportunities and the challenges linked to that. So I will start with the state of play. Well, as I said, the plans were adopted in February. But with the decision to adopt the plans, the government also decided to give assignments for a new planning round to come up with new proposals that includes a substantial amount of offshore wind areas. And I will come back to that. In parallel to this, we're also about to adopt a framework for monitoring and follow-up of the adopted plans. Oh, well, why this new planning round? It might sound a little bit strange to adopt plans and in the same decision you decide to revise them. But the background is, of course, the need for electricity. And the government has assigned us to actually increase the potential for offshore wind in the marine special plans from 30 terawatt hours in annual production to 120 terawatt hours annually. That means roughly 30 gigawatts, as was mentioned by Nele Meyer in the beginning of this webinar. And the proposal shall be ready by the end of December 2024. And SwAM is responsible for developing the proposals together with a number of agencies and actors, of course. And to support this task, there are also other assignments. There is an assignment related to planning evidence on additional areas for energy, taking other interests into consideration. That should be finalized by the end of March next year, and that's coordinated by the Energy Agency. And that's you can say that's the kind of initial planning stage where maybe a similar method being used by SYKE might be used here. It's going through the planning areas and try to find the best areas for offshore wind, as I said, in relation to other interests. So we also have to look at biodiversity, defense, fisheries, shipping, and so on. And currently the Energy Agency is developing the method for this exercise that will start after the summer. There is also a specific assignment related to knowledge compilation on coexistence between offshore wind and commercial fisheries, agriculture, and nature conservation. And it's a kind of desktop study, and that will be presented next year. And that is done by the Swedish Agency for Marine and Water Management and the Energy Agency together. And of course, this study is quite important because we can already see that fisheries and nature conservation will be problematic when you scale up the planning of offshore wind. So it's an important knowledge to bring to the process. Then we also have an assignment to elaborate proposals for legislative changes to be able to grant exclusivity in the different maritime zones, and that should be done by the end of November this year. I will come back to these studies further on in my presentation. Well, why do we have this new assignment? Well, we heard before, particularly in the beginning by Nele Meyer, that we need electricity, we need renewable energy, and there's a lot of EU national targets related to that. We have the Fit for 55 and so on, and the same goes for Sweden, of course. And in Sweden, we see that we can foresee huge decarbonization and electrification of the industry and transport sector, and you will see the same in other European countries, of course. But for Sweden in particular, it's linked to the fossil, to the steel industry, because the steel industry is actually, the emissions from the steel industry are huge today, and they are representing a large share of the emissions from Sweden. And there has been a number of projects related to the development of fossil-free steel, which of course is based on fossil-free iron production. There's been a number of projects, and actually already there have been fossil-free steel produced, and there are huge investments coming in the next few years, and billions and billions of euros will be invested in this new production, and this production will need an enormous amount of electricity in order to produce hydrogen for the different processes. So it's very difficult with figures, but I would say like maybe 70 to 100 terawatt hours annually just for the steel industry. And you should compare that to the current use in Sweden, which is 140 terawatt hours in electricity consumption. Then, of course, we have other industries like the concrete and cement industry. We have all these battery factories that we also have in other countries in Europe. We have the server halls. And then, of course, the electrification of the transport sector with direct electricity or via hydrogen. Then, of course, also we have the new security situation where we want to be independent. So, of course, that's also important. Maybe a little bit less for Sweden as a country, but of course, very important for our European Union. And then something that is rarely mentioned, but we also need to reinvest, because part of this renewable energy production is becoming quite old and maybe not that efficient. So we also see huge reinvestment needs ahead of us. Well, if we try to estimate the need for reinvestment and new investment, we can see that there might be a capacity gap, because if we do not invest in new capacity, there will be a gap approximately running up to 200 terawatt hours annually by the year 2050. And here you can see that the dashed line, that's the current production, and the orange line is the Swedish consumption. So Sweden today is a net exporter. And if we don't do anything, if we don't invest, and if we do not reinvest, of course the capacity will go down at the same time as the need for electricity will increase. So we really need to act. And that's why we have these assignments linked to the marine special plans. But of course, all these kind of calculations are very difficult to do, and it might be even more coming as times go by. So, well, going to the plans, the marine special plans, as I said, they were adopted in February by the government. We have 3 of them, and they are quite different in size, and the biggest one is the Baltic Sea one, and the smallest one is the Skagerrak and Kattegat. We have to bear that in mind when you see these maps. They are quite classical. We have 10 uses. As you recognize from all the marine special plans in Europe, you have energy, defense, culture, nature, sun extraction, shipping. We also have commercial fisheries, which is important, and we also have electricity transfer and sand extraction. So this is a map from the south of Sweden, south of Skåne. Yes, and we also have something called areas for particular consideration, and that's about highlighting certain issues, certain interests. And we have that for total defense. We have that for high culture values, but also for high nature values. We identified 38 areas with very high nature values, but with no protection as of today. And here we also have something called climate refuge, which are areas important for the future. They might not be so important today, but maybe that in the future. And if we go to the actual energy planning, it looks like this. And you can see there is a kind of amalgamation of areas in the South Bothnian Bay. Then we have 3 areas in the Baltic Sea and 3 areas in the Kattegat. So in all, we have 11 areas for energy extraction, and we have 3, as we call them, investigation areas for energy extraction, and that are areas where we expect the need of a Natura 2000 permit, and that's why they're called investigation areas. So actually, the Natura 2000 permitting process is the one defining whether it's possible to have offshore wind or not. And in all areas, particular consideration should be taken to total defense interests, and in some cases also to high nature values. So you can see with these investigation areas, we have also offshore wind areas within or very close to Natura 2000 areas. And if you make a rough calculation, what this means in production, well, theoretically, this would mean 60 terawatt hours annual production. But of course, we know that all these areas will not be possible due to technical reasons or due to other interests. So we estimate that maybe 20 to 30 terawatt hours would be more realistic. That's our calculation. We have already one approval in one area, that's Kriegers Flak. And they also had this requirement to have a 2000 permit, which they have. And that's Vattenfall, that is the one having that license. And that was recently decided. Our planning is based on something called national interest areas, but also in other areas identified in the process using certain criteria. And also we had some information from the industry that we used, but that were then checked by us and other agencies helping us. We also did a kind of scenario analysis using the methods used in the environmental impact assessments, trying to see how different solutions would be from an environmental point of view. That has some impact in how we planned the Bothnian Bay and also how we planned the areas south of Gotland, between Gotland and Poland. So we did some kind of scenario analysis for that. And the main conflicts in our planning were defense interests and nature conservation. And actually there were a lot of areas in the Baltic Sea in particular that did not went through the process all the way, but that were exclusive due to military interests. And we heard about the safety distance needed in relation to shipping. In our planning, it has been referred to the permitting process. As for this new process, we don't know, because now it's a more kind of massive energy planning, so we might need to do it in other ways. I think it has already been raised by the transport agencies that this issue is quite important for this second planning round. Well, as for the system in Sweden, it's a little different from the other countries in Europe. I would say it's still a kind of market-based system. We don't have an auction system. We don't have a system where the state or the country identify areas and then select who will be allowed to build in these areas. So we still have this market-based system, and we have that also for other types of energy, also like for nuclear energy, for example. We also have a system where there is little or no legal support for granting exclusivity to an area, and that's something we're missing. It comes from history and how Sweden has managed its sea areas. And the case is that the common waters in the territorial sea is managed by the state, but it's not owned by the state. So of course this is a complication. And this means that we have, for several areas now, we have multiple applications in this market-based system. And of course, all this is a complication. And that's why we have this new assignment to try to come up with proposals for new legislation to deal with this. And also Sweden, we have a system where the municipalities have the right to kind of veto any establishment of wind energy. except very small installations. So you have to have a consent from municipality if you want to build something in the territorial waters, and of course that is kind of complicated, and the municipalities are run by politicians. So the local council is the one actually deciding here whether it's possible or not, and that makes it a little bit unsecure, and there's a risk to entering an application process where you don't really know whether the municipality will say yes or no in the end. But we also have something called national interest areas, and that means that energy has priorities in some areas, and that has been translated into the planning, into the marine special plans. And when it comes to approval, we have a system where the land environment courts decide when it comes to territorial sea, also when it comes to 2000 permits. As for the exclusive economic zone, it's the government or the cabinet that actually decides. But it's the regional level, the county administrative boards that decide on the 2000 permits, which is an interesting case. Then, of course, this is very simplified because there's a number of licenses you need, but for the main permits licenses, this is the situation. As I said at the beginning, I will talk about the project boom, because there is really a project boom. The industry is really ready to invest a lot in applications. Of course, that's quite costly. And this is just an extract from a Swedish site showing projects, and you can recognize it from Nele Meyer's picture earlier today. And this is also just a kind of indicative map, because there are other projects not included in this map, and these areas, there are different status of them. But it is a boom. I think there are approximately 70 applications, roughly, for transmission grid connection for up to 120 gigawatts for offshore wind. And that's the first stage in the application process. And approximately 40 projects of these, they have received investigation permits or have initiated environmental impact assessments. So actually they are spending money on developing their projects, and that's a lot, considering that we have very few offshore wind parks as of today, and not so many in our plans. And several projects concern or are about floating turbines. They might be further on in the future, but they have started. So that we have also, I think we have like 3 or 4 projects related or concerning floating turbines. So the industry is really ready to act. And some of these applications have come quite far, and of course some are in the initial phases. The government has also decided to assign the Swedish TSO, Svenska kraftnät, to actually extend the transmission grid to connection nodes in the territorial sea to facilitate and increase the offshore wind. And several offshore wind parks are expected to connect to each node, and this will be financed through net tariffs. And Svenska kraftnät, the TSO, they have an assignment to report on preparations by the next week, actually, that we report, and they might give some geographic indications where it might be suitable to connect, at least connect on the land side. So this map will be changed later on when we have these connection nodes in the territorial sea. I come to the end of my presentation. Just to summarize, there are a lot of opportunities right now for offshore wind, but there are also some challenges, and some challenges are quite tough, at least for Sweden. First talking about opportunities, the current plans, they are in place. They give some preconditions for offshore wind. We have an industry that is really willing to invest, Swedish companies, European companies, and other companies. They're investing a lot in these applications. We have all these ambitions, from the EU, from the Swedish, from the national level. And of course, that's linked to the demand for electricity and for our security, and related to the climate change mitigation and so on. So there are clear ambitions. There are many agencies involved due to all these government assignments. I think I might be wrong, but it's between like 11 to 13 agencies having kind of direct assignments in these different to contribute to the development of preconditions for offshore wind. So there's a lot of things going on right now. The transmission grid will be extended to the territorial sea. Of course, that's also an opportunity. And then, of course, we have the technology development. The floating turbines are being developed. Maybe also they will be developed to have them in large-scale parks. We have all this discussion on hydrogen production, which could take place at sea or on land. And of course, that's a factor that will come into this. And there might also be a demand for hydrogen, and hydrogen will be used as a way to plan your production from the offshore wind parks and so on. So it's something that is, of course, an opportunity. There's a lot of innovation going on. So that's also very good. And I'm not sure that it's only the climate change or decarbonization that drives the development. It's also the willingness to develop and change the industry. So innovation is of course, a real opportunity here. And of course, there are developments related to coexistence coming along as experience grows. And of course, one opportunity is that government is responsible for approval or approving in the economic zones. It makes life a little bit easier. But then, of course, we have the conflicts and the challenges, including the conflicts with other interests or restrictions, as was said by SYKE. We have expanding defense interests. I think the defense budget will increase by 60%, of course, and that might have some impact on how they need to use the sea. We have the ambitious biodiversity targets, including the 10% strictly protected areas, that also we have to deal with in our upcoming or our ongoing new planning process. And then we have a commercial fishery that is under pressure due to the biodiversity targets, of course, and for fish stock problems. And now comes the offshore winds. Of course, that's something that needs to be dealt with. And then we have the requirement for mutual consent, which of course is a tough challenge. And then our permitting system that is complex. This market-based system with new exclusivity, very long licensing process, and of course that means high risks and costs for investors, etc. So I think I stop there. Thank you.
Well, thank you for the excellent talk and the concise overview of the Swedish system. I think we have time for like a direct question to you. And I think that is interesting from Mr. Schubert. How do you explain the difference between the energy investigation zones and the actually investigated areas from private companies? I guess, what is the steering mechanism there? I think this is where this question may be going.
Well, it's two different things. The investigation areas for energy in the plan it's a zone in the plan. That's something that relates to the need for 2,000 permits. Investigation in the project is something else. It's something that you apply for, and that's one of the first steps. And that you can apply for that anywhere. There are no restrictions, and in most cases they are accepted. It depends on the environmental impact, of course, and there are some cases where there has been a no also, but normally it's okay. The problem is that now we have this kind of multiple applications, and so you can have several investigations going on in the same area, which increases the environmental pressure, and also might not be, I mean, from a societal point of view, not a good way of handling the money. But that's the result of the system.
Yes, seems quite like the German system from a couple of years ago. So if there's one more question from Ms. Kühl-Stenzel, and I will just paraphrase this. Is there a some sort of continuation of the German corridor for bird migration that's in the German MSP, in the Swedish MSP?
The corridor as such is not marked in the plan, but it has been. I think it has been taken into consideration in the environmental impact assessment.
Yes.
But of course, this is something that we will need to revisit again, because there will be. I think there are new planning evidence coming from HELCOM and so on, so that will be used in this new planning round. So we'll see how that will turn out in the new maps. But it was used. It was part of the input to the environmental impact assessment.
Thanks. Well, and then with this, I think we should close the direct questions to this talk and invite everybody who has been a speaker to turn the cameras on and join into the panel discussion. And I think maybe we should start with an easy discussion, an easy question that Vanessa has just written into the chat, which goes to, I think, mainly Nele, Joacim, and Markku, which is what sort of cumulative impact assessment methodologies are applied in different countries for assessing the total effects of multiple individual wind farm projects? And I may add to this, how is the transboundary aspect in this being taken into consideration? So, sorry, I should just start with science. Markku, are you there?
Yes.
Yes. Do you have any idea on the cumulative impact assessment approaches that are taking place in Finland?
Sure. Cumulative impact assessments are mostly made under the command of Helsinki Commission, HELCOM, and such analysis might be useful for looking at the ecological impacts of different human activities. And well, but the challenge is that we don't know much about the long-term impacts of offshore wind energy, other than the direct effects that the building might have on habitats by destruction of the habitats and some siltation of nearby habitats after the construction phase. On the other hand, there are ample evidence that the basis of the windmills might provide some new hard substrate for many types of organisms and provide artificial reefs, and this type of effects might be positive. So as for the environmental impacts of offshore wind energy, we mostly have educated guesses.
Okay, thank you. And Joacim, how are you looking at, cumulative and also transboundary cumulative assessments?
Well, we have been using this symphony method, assessing the cumulative impacts. It's a method used in different countries but under different names. And then we have added other analysis to that because it's not complete when it comes to cumulative impact assessments. But we have mainly done it at national level and less on the Baltic Sea basin level.
Mm-hmm.
So that's something that I think we need to develop further regionally. How to do this at regional basis, I think.
Yes. Sorry, Markku, you raised your hand.
Yes, I just wanted to add that I'm taking cumulative impacts quite literally here, because of course different types of impacts need to be taken into account in formal impact assessments and so forth. But whether different impacts that are becoming cumulative in an area, whether they are like more than the sum of each is an open question. It's very hard to define how the cumulative impacts would affect different organisms in the marine environment when they become more and more on top of each other, whether there is some kind of a threshold after which the system will collapse. These are very complex questions, and I don't think we do have very good answers for many of them. But as for direct impacts of multiple human pressures, for instance, that is of course doable, that you can make a map of the impact area of a certain human activity and then avoid these in the planning. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. No, thanks, and thanks for your insight on this. I think I will jump maybe off this topic to another one where we hope that Diego and George may be able to help us out here on the panel, because they have been in closest contact to the industry. A number of questions were on the point of, will it even be feasible to build that much wind energy? I mean, once you're convinced it's okay to build it. What are the bottlenecks that you see in terms of industry there? And I mean, I realize you're probably not involved yourself with this, but maybe you can still provide some ideas there.
Yeah, I have to apologize on behalf of George, who had another commitment. So I would be the guilty one for the response to this question. It's a difficult question from a mariner's perspective. The number of installation is awful. You would see that what was considered the open sea now is becoming a sort of highway with defined really narrow channels for vessels. But of course, this is progress, and you can stop it. I believe that probably technologies will improve something in the future, and we might be able to see. I'll just make it an example of the oil and gas industry. Before they started, drilling when we're like 200 meters depth, then they increased the depth, and now they can even work at 1,000 meters of depth. So I expect that also the offshore, the wind farm industry will develop in the future, and where before it wasn't, let's say, suitable to build something, it might become in the future.
Mm. And do you have any information on if there's even enough ships, if there's enough installation capacity, even enough qualified mariners to put this into place in for the short-term goal of 2030? Do you have any idea on this?
Yeah, well, because when you prepare a feasibility study for the development of a wind farm, you have to start from the construction and installation vessels. And then you look at the fleet, how at the moment in time, at a given moment in time, the fleet is distributed around the world. If, for instance, there is a peak of request in the Far East, you have of course, fleet that if commercially and economically is advantage for the owners, that move from the European area to the Far East. And then if at the same time the European area need those specialized vessels, they are not available for a long time. And with the current state of at least of the intentions of the various countries, of course the fleet is not enough to sustain and support all the, at least at the moment, intentions, at least, because there are a lot of discussion or this is going to be done or not, but of course owner need some tangible and contracts to invest in future.
Okay. Thanks. And then so I'm jumping a bit in the questions here. We have a question from Ms. Kuh-Stenzel. And I mean, maybe I just invite you to put this yourself, because just maybe you can tell us what the main thrust of your question is, if you are still there and can turn on your camera for a second. Thank you.
Sure. Hi. Thank you. Yeah, we've had a number of events on MSP in Berlin last week and one yesterday where we launched these bird life reports, which I encourage you to take a look at. And yeah, we got a strong message from MPs in Germany across all the different parties that they consider the current 70 gigawatts targets as completely unrealistic. Both we've had some practical considerations and concerns today, but also in terms of biodiversity targets, we really, a strong call to have climate protection and environmental protection. They need to go hand in hand. And there was a call for ocean-wide planning. And so here, having so many Baltic stakeholders around, I would like to hear from you, from the countries, how can we link up the different national plans in terms of, getting towards a cumulative impact assessment, recognizing, that we've got gaps in knowledge, but also a lot of wealth of, new tools being developed, and recognizing that really there's a strong need to do so. And once we've got, for example, the EU law on nature restoration coming out, there'll be even more pressures on you to perform at that end. So I'd be keen to hear from the countries. Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you. So I'm sorry, I can only pass this on to Joacim and Nele. So maybe Nele, you want to start with this question.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, like we totally agree. This is a huge challenge, and also how what I elaborated in my presentation. It's really a conflict between the targets for nature protection and the targets for renewable energy, and I think really the goal is, or the instrument is, regional cooperation. So what we see, for example, in Denmark right now with these energy islands, where we really connect countries with each other, where, for example, it is not necessary anymore to have like one cable to onshore to each country. This would be an option, for example, to reduce the impact on the seafloor. So I would totally agree that we should look at it on a Baltic scale and also on a North Sea scale. And I think the first steps are made. So if we look at the SYKE declaration, so it's now a common goal and a common approach. Yeah. So I would pass it to Joacim, maybe.
Yeah, I also totally agree that we need to deepen our cooperation here, and it's really challenging to have. I mean, we hear about all these ambitions and these plans, and it's we hear about the problems linked to shipping, and that's also a problem that's linked to environment. So, and all these cables and so on. So I think we really need to deepen our cooperation, and it will be challenging, and I think also in our national process, finding all these areas will be really difficult, considering the other restrictions we are having, like defense, for example, which is a really tough restriction, and of course nature is another very tough restrictions that we need to deal with. So I think it's we'll do our best, but at the end of the day, of course, nature, I mean, we have like for Natura 2000, for example, the areas that already identify with high nature values and having that kind of protection, the legislation is quite clear. there are boundaries they are not allowed to pass, and that we need to follow, of course. So of course this will be really difficult, and also as you might know, all these issues are within our agency, because we're also the Environment Protection Agency for the sea. So we have a kind of lively debate and discussion also internally on this, how to deal with this. Thank you.
Well, thank you. Then I think maybe what ties into these questions is a question from the very beginning is coexistence or multi-use. And here I would be interested in the views of also again Markku and perhaps Joachim and Nele. Do you have any idea what sort of multi-use we could see in practice in the Baltic? Is there anything that you've looked into? So Markku, if you want to take the first step at this. Well, and when we say multi-use, we in this context we mean offshore wind energy and something else. And what would that be?
Aquaculture is the obvious that has been discussed several times, at least in Finland. Currently, I have been told that the planning regulations currently don't allow, or at least don't favor, including two different activities in the same area. But I noted that Mari Pohjamykra was amongst the audience, so she could perhaps comment on that information. Other types of activities are, well, the biodiversity compensation could be one very relevant one, if there could be either the actual installation itself as a biodiversity or artificial reef, or you can maybe sink in other structures like concrete frames or something that would increase the three-dimensionality of the bottom. But then again, you need to consider the ice conditions, because the pack ice is sometimes roughly 10 meters deep or even deeper, and so on. As for fishing, we could see from the earlier presentation how dangerous it might be that there are too much maritime traffic in close to the installation. So I'm not sure if all fishing would be restricted, but if there are some biodiversity benefits, you might expect that there could be some like improvement in fishing yield, just surrounding the areas in a good positive sense. But then again, we don't know much about the negative impacts of wind mills on fish. So there are many open questions. Thank you.
Yes, no, thanks for your answer. Joacim, Nele, do you want to add anything?
I can just say that we're doing the study right now on coexistence, or rather co-location, which could be the same as multi-use in some cases. And of course, fisheries is very interesting, but I would say rather co-location rather than multi-use. But so that's something we actually look into, what possibilities are there actually. And then of course you have co-location or multi-use related to nature conservation, whether you have these reef effects or not. But that's not activity, but of course the reef effect might end up in healthier fish stocks and so on. So that could of course be good. Well, it's something that we are. You can say that it's a demand from the policy level that we should look into that co-location and multi-use, and they also see it as a way of reducing the conflict level in the planning.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Yeah, Maybe I can add to this. Like I think we have the same discussion ongoing. Like what are the effects on nature conservation and fishery, for example. And we have one area actually that has a kind of co-use by research and offshore wind energy. So this will be kind of a test, but it's like really in the future, because it's an area which was used for a very long time for research on fishery, and they would like to gain further on their data in this area. So, and this is something which is in the German MSP already there.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so then one of the next questions I would give to Elina. This regards the this is a question from, sorry, let me just scroll there, from Jenny Rennell, and she says there's a commitment to a cetacean-friendly MSP. Do you know if that has been considered at VASAB? You know, the effects on marine mammals, such as Savvopoulos in the VASAB program at some point, or is this in the between HELCOM and VASAB more like on the HELCOM side?
Yeah, well, as I'm not environmentalist, so this term scenes, I even don't know how to pronounce it. I just Google it, what it means. So, but I should say that VASAB draft vision, it's focusing more broadly on biodiversity, how to preserve the biodiversity for the future generations and things like that. And of course, more specific issues are also being discussed with the HELCOM VASAB setting as well. Also, how to to ensure those targets that are set for biodiversity, because also the Maritime spatial planning can address them in a better way. Yeah, that would be at the moment from my side.
Yes, thanks. Thanks, Elina, and I hope that answers the question. Then we have a question that actually 2 thumbs up from Kira. And the question is, given how busy our seas are becoming and given the need for renewable energy, is there any way offshore wind could be compatible with some form of environmental protection and biodiversity conservation? Or will they always be incompatible? And here I think I would actually, again, I'm sorry, Markku, but a lot of the questions are coming your way, and maybe then Nele and Joacim again.
I think there is a, as you know, we have these biodiversity targets of 30%, and yes, part of that discussion is this, if we should use these OECMs. OECMs are these other effective area-based conservation measures, things that actually support biodiversity. And in this discussion there is this discussion whether offshore wind parks could be OECMs, or like pipelines and so on. So there is a discussion that actually you can see these structures as something that supports some of the biodiversity at least. So at least there is a discussion on that. And then of course that's well, controversial in that community. So there are very different views on how to see this, but it's part of the discussion.
Mm-hmm. So Markku, did you have an opinion on this? Is there any research that says like this is possible?
To declare the installation areas as OECMs?
Well, not that. I think that's a very specific question. I think on the broader way is like, can offshore wind farms be compatible with nature conservation or aspects of nature conservation, or is that like will that never go together?
Certainly, I mean, what means compatible? First of all, you need to avoid the negative impacts on biodiversity and the functionality of the ecosystem, and it can be done by this type of analysis that we have seen today. And then there might be some positive impacts that they may have, for instance, artificial reef effects, and if that really is true, then there might be a balance between destructing habitats and improving some other types of ecosystem components. So it would be like a compensation mechanism that we might see here. But as I have repeated many times, there are many open questions regarding the true effects, the long-term effects that we have. If we would have a lot of fish surrounding the installations, would the consumers accept them? Some might be suspicious of whatever effects might be involved in fish that have been grown around windmills and so on. Very hard to say. But all in all, I would say that yes, if you can first of all place them in an ecologically sustainable way, then that's the first step. And then secondly, if you can study if there are some biodiversity benefits that can be provided, and even spillover effects as an increased fish production, if that is possible, then that's really very positive.
Yes, open questions. I guess this is where we're going. I mean, unfortunately, the curtain on this webinar is about to close, and we still have a lot of open questions. But I will not let you go without every panelist answering a final question. And this would be, in your view, what would you think is the biggest obstacle to reaching the ambitious offshore wind farm and offshore renewable energy targets for the Baltic Sea? And maybe we should just go with the order I see the people on my screen. That would be Elina first.
Yeah, well, I think what we all hear today about this challenges, if you have increase in the demand for instruction and building, that would be for the first thought, of course. And I think also this quite challenging processes, coordination with other interests, and also I think it came a lot of these concerns from the chat that. Having such ambitious goals, that probably there might be some compromises that might not be so satisfying for other sectors or nature. So this is quite challenging, yeah, in my view.
Yes, thanks, Diego.
Yeah, well, there's been a lot of discussion that are outside of my field of expertise. But it's very important, I guess, that I believe that, for instance, the environmental impact is a primary, a paramount importance to focus on, and this probably this before the safety navigation, because it's something that is for future, not only for the transportation of goods at the current time.
Okay, thanks. Nele?
Well, I think in general the pressure on maritime space is very high. So maybe in some areas there is not enough space to fulfill all targets and all ambitions, and that will lead to conflicts. And I think this is one of the biggest issue, and also why I think MSP is so important. And another thing which is really has also been raised in the chat, and also I think in some of the presentations, is the supply of materials and also the expertise and so on, because it's now growing so fast. So I see these two as the biggest obstacles.
Yes, thank you. Joacim?
Yeah, I would tend to agree with that. I mean, nature conservation and the environmental impact would be really a tricky one, because nature is where it is, and we have these values, and even though we can find smart solutions and new technology, it's there. So I think it will be tricky. especially as we foresee this huge increase of offshore wind. And then, of course, just as of today, in the Swedish case, it will be the defense, because defense is so turns out to be quite vital. So I think that will also be tricky, but that might be solved by technology and smart solutions. But I would say environmental impact will be the big challenge.
Yeah, thanks. And Markku.
Sorry, I can't concentrate on two things at the same time. I was answering Martin. So what was the question?
What do you see as the biggest? It's very nice that you answered the questions in the chat, and I thank you for this. So the question was, what do you see as the biggest obstacle to achieving the ambitious targets for offshore renewable energies for the Baltic?
Well, the sheer scale of the needed increase is humongous, of course, and then soon we come to the level brought up by Vanessa Ryan from WWF, for instance. If there are so many of these installations that they become close each other, and then they become to induce cumulative impacts that we know nothing of. It's hard to say, but for the time being, if there are like larger wind parks with 200 mills in a place where it creates not too much environmental impact and it's still profitable and useful for the people, then we are on the safe side. But all of the need will be hard to place on the sea. It's just a matter of scale of increasing the. Thank you.
Thanks. And I think this is almost a closing statement, which I don't think I can do much better. I will thank you for being here. Thank you for all the keynote speakers. And as you know, we cannot give you the customary mug because you're like not here, but at some point we will find an opportunity to give you that. I would not like to close in before we give a big applause to Nele and Elina for organizing this and putting this together, which was quite a bit of work. And so thank you for doing that. And with this and final thanks to the speakers, I would like to wish you a happy rest of the week, and I will see you soon, and perhaps I will see you, like Xavier said, next week in Brest. Goodbye.